6 News. Coverage you can count on. Starts with breaking news.
Church officials routinely and purposefully described the abuse as horseplay and wrestling and inappropriate contact. It was none of those things. It was child sexual abuse, including rape, committed by grown men, priests, against children.
Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro speaking quite candidly today as he laid out the case against 6 Catholic dioceses across the state. A systematic, organized cover-up of abuse by church leaders, he says, stretched in some cases the whole way to the Vatican. A pattern of abuse, he says, was protected by an institution at all costs. And today, tears led the announcement in a powerful, graphic, and emotional video that let alleged victims of clergy abuse speak in their own words about what happened and how it affected them their entire lives. About a dozen alleged victims sat behind Shapiro in Harrisburg today as he detailed the nearly 900-page report released today. Shapiro calling all of them heroes. Good evening. Shapiro says more than 1,000 child victims were identified through this investigation, but he says the grand jury believes that number is much more, possibly in the thousands. The grand jury writing in its report, quote, "We don't think we got them all. We feel certain many didn't come forward." So before we delve into the report tonight, we have a number for you to write down. It's also on your screen right there. It will be scrolling on the bottom of your screen throughout this broadcast. This is the clergy abuse hotline set up by the Attorney General's office. Anyone who may have been victimized or has information about abuse is urged to call. You can call right now. The number 888-538-8541. It will continue to scroll, as I said, at the bottom of your screen throughout our newscast tonight. Now team coverage. Dylan Richard digs into the report to see how it says clergy members use their authority and their trust of their victims to get away with this abuse. But first, we want to begin with Bridget McClure. She's been focusing on the Catholic Diocese of Erie for us, which covers Clearfield, Jefferson, Elk, and Cameron counties. Bridget.
Jen, the grand jury report named 41 priests and clergymen in the Diocese of Erie accused of sexual contact with minors. Now, after sifting through that report, we found 12 of those 41 men had local ties to our areas, and some of the alleged abuse actually taking place right here. Now, we want to remind you, you can read the entire report with all the names on our website, but according to the report, Father Gilles Nealon sexually abused several boys while he was the assistant pastor at Queen of the World in St. Mary's in 1970. Reverend John Patkowski is accused of sexually assaulting an older boy in the church basement and in the parish house of the Assumption in Sykesville. The report says administration, including bishops, had knowledge of this conduct, and yet priests were regularly placed in ministry after the Erie Diocese was on notice that a complaint of child sexual abuse was made. It goes on to say, the diocese made settlements with victims and had discussions with lawyers regarding the sexual conduct, and says those agreements forbid victims from speaking about the abuse. The grand jury report also states administrators dissuaded victims from reporting the abuse and persuaded law enforcement to drop their investigations. Now, of those with ties to the Tri-County area, several served at Elk County Christian and served as administrators, teachers, and faculty. We want to be clear, the abuse allegations did not take place during their time at the school. Monsignor Daniel Martin served as headmaster from 1962 to 1970. Martin was a priest in the Diocese of Erie for 43 years and is facing allegations of sexually abusing 2 victims. Father William Presley served at Elk County Christian High School from 1965 to 1970. His sexual abuses, as reported to the diocese, involved 2 victims and spanned nearly 16 years.
Instead of reporting it to police, diocesan officials held meetings with Presley to review the complaints. They noted that he never denied the allegations. Despite that, they concluded Presley's victims were troubled and had psychological problems. The diocese chose to send Presley for evaluation by a doctor and then placed him right back in ministry.
El County Catholic tells us this is a hard day for the school and the church community, and went on to say El County Catholic joins Bishop Lawrence Persico in expressing our profound sorrow for the victims in these cases. This report highlights serious failures of moral and institutional leadership over many years. The graphic details highlight the ways in which those failures compounded the suffering inflicted on these victims. Now, Bishop Lawrence Persico of the Catholic Diocese of Erie held a press conference this afternoon in Erie. He said that he admires the courage of survivors who came forward and offered an apology on behalf of the Catholic Church for what they've endured.
I know the abuse you endured continues to cause great pain in your lives and in the lives of those who you love. Because of the report, the public will begin to understand your pain in a new way.
Now, Attorney General Josh Shapiro highlighted Persico today and thanked him for his response to this, quote, crisis. He said Persico gives him hope. Persico was the only bishop to testify before the grand jury, saying the mishandling of complaints by his predecessors made him angry and he wanted to do the right thing. Today, Shapiro said Persico did just that. Reporting live, Bridget McClure, 6 News.
Again, this report is more than 1,300 pages long. So far, we've been able to identify 12 clergy members who have had ties to our region. We're compiling a list right now. It's available on our website, WJACTV.com. If you look through the report yourself, you'll see several words that are blacked out. In some cases, there are paragraphs, even entire pages blacked out. Those are parts of the report that have been redacted due to petitions filed keeping names and information out of the report. Today, Shapiro made it very clear that his office is not satisfied with this version of the report. He says it represents only a fraction of what he calls predator priests.
Let me be very clear. My office is not satisfied with the release of a redacted report. Every redaction represents an incomplete story of abuse that deserves to be told. Grand jury investigation.
Shapiro says he and the grand jury will fight vigorously to tell every story. They will argue for the release of the redacted information in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It is scheduled for September 26th. The report goes into a lot of detail about how Catholic churches across the state allegedly covered up abuse. And it goes into graphic detail about how priests use their status as men of God to more easily abuse boys. And Dylan Richards has been reading through this report. And Dylan, what are we starting to learn here?
Then this report marks an important step in a historic investigation. It's believed to be the most comprehensive report about sex abuse in the church by any state ever. Grand juries have now investigated every diocese in the state. Only some content described in this report will be graphic. In an extraordinary multi-year 884-page investigation, Pennsylvania grand jurors found that church leaders across the Commonwealth covered up the abuse of 1,000 children, 1,000 allegedly abused by men of God. That number, jurors said, came from church records. They believe, though, that number could be much higher. On Tuesday, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro spoke about the investigation, but first played a video of some of the victims of abuse, including Sean Doherty, a Johnstown native who said he was abused in 5th grade.
You have the priest touching you every day. You know, that's a hard memory to have. The first thought of an erection that you have in your life is by the hands of the priest.
Many of the accused predators, according to the grand jury, used their positions of power for abuse.
We were taught, I mean, the priests and the nuns are God.
On Tuesday, Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro said this investigation started during the investigation of the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown. The report is full of stories of alleged abuse. In one case in Scranton, the grand jury says priest Thomas Skotek raped a young girl, got her pregnant, and arranged for an abortion for her. The grand jury says Bishop James Timlin consoled the priest in a letter. Shapiro said that many churches work to delay abuse from becoming public for as long as possible.
As a direct consequence of the systematic cover-up by senior church officials, almost every instance of child sexual abuse we found is too old to be prosecuted.
The grand jury recommended changes to statute of limitation laws. For example, victims in Pennsylvania can't come forward after they turn 50 years old. The grand jury recommended that be taken away completely. A bill that would get rid of those limitations and make it easier for victims to sue is making its way through the state legislature now. Dylan Richards, 6 News.
The Survivors Network for those abused by priests is commending the brave men and women who shared their heartbreaking truths. They are also applauding Attorney General Josh Shapiro for fighting to ensure that truths were made public. SNAP is now begging survivors to come forward and report to law enforcement. Locally tonight, it has been almost 2.5 years now since the Diocese of Altoona-Johnstown had its own damning report. That was March 1st, 2016. At least 50 priests and religious leaders throughout the diocese were accused of sexual abuse against children for decades. Dozens of others listed as either covering up abuse or not reporting it. Much like it, today's statewide grand jury report contains such graphic descriptions of abuse that we cannot share some of it with you on television, but you can read it for yourself in its entirety on our website, WJACTV.com. There you will find the complete report released today, as well as responses from some of those listed. In all, it's 1,356 pages long. We will also post links to all of the stories you see today and those in the coming days. All of that and more at WJACTV.com.